this story just ain't going away. And looking at, police probes into Andrew and indeed to Lord Mandelson and all of the wider revelations. We've seen a lot more over the weekend about, all these different claims, some allegedly criminal, many not criminal, just about oafish behaviour and RAF planes and who knew what and who knew it. The tentacles are spreading much wider. It's going back many, many years, and it is reaching all the way to the top of the current palace, including the King and indeed Prince of Wales as well. How damaging do you think this all is? And do you think that some sort of parliamentary probe would be relevant?
Well, first of all, yes, it is damaging. There's no point saying it's not damaging because it clearly is damaging. It overshadows things that the royal family do. I mean, you've just got to look at some of the public outings that they do, their normal job, if you like, and there's people calling all sorts of things about what did you know about Andrew. Now, the thing that's always fascinated me about this case, now way before any of the allegations about corruption in public places from Andrew allegedly, he had the allegations of sexual impropriety, which again he denies fully. He then gets called into a room where his mother is sitting, his brother is sitting, and his nephew is sitting, and they say to him, "We've had all these allegations, Andrew. What do you know about them?" Now, did he explain fully that, yes, I did, it's, I'm sorry about this, but, I think these are the way things are? Or did he, as he more likely said, none of this is true, it's all a load of lies, and they're just trying to besmirch me and everything else, hence the money was paid. Why the money was paid in the first place, I still don't know. But that is a question that needs to be answered. And you and your guest earlier on, I think it was Benjamin, were saying things like, we need an inquiry as to who knew what, when they knew it, and how they knew it. And that inquiry has to come after the investigation into...
probe. But this is the thing. I mean, police probes, these things can take years. There was a lot. I mean, I think we were all pretty shocked on Thursday when the police turned up at the Sandringham estate, and then to learn, I think half an hour later, that the former second, I mean, at one point he was second in line to the throne, for goodness sake, had been arrested and spent 12 hours or so in custody. And that extraordinary photograph of him that ended up on the front pages of pretty much every paper in the world on Friday. But a lot of people will be saying that, but a lot of information. Now, this is all related to the latest stuff of the Epstein files and the implications, again, which he's denied that there was, that he'd leaked information, confidential government information to Epstein, which would have been financially beneficial to him. But all the allegations about the oafish behaviour, the inappropriate behaviour, and various other, and question marks over his finances, they've been around for decades, Charlie.
Absolutely. And I think you've got to clear the board. I mean, you say, well, how long is it going to take? Well, look, just how long did it take for the COVID inquiry to come? The post office scandal inquiry. This is not something that's going to happen next week. They're talking about removing him from the line of succession, which is fine. I mean, he's never going to be king in any case. Or anyway.
So that's a very, very tragic course of events for all the others in line to the throne to die before him.
Well, exactly. So that's got to happen. Yes, I'm convinced he will be removed from the line of succession at some stage or other. But the actual, I mean, if you looked at the Sunday papers yesterday, as I'm sure you did, Julia, I mean, I got them delivered. The poor paper boy had to carry them into the house, and drop them on the carpet. And it was like a brick. I mean, it was like a ton of brick. And I couldn't get through all of it. Most of it is repeated stuff, as you well know. It's going through all sorts of things. But there are things there like, Tom Tugendhat is calling for a treason investigation. Well, why isn't he mentioning Mandelson in all this? Because that's the same sort of thing that he's being accused of as well. So it just goes to show that they're focusing on Andrew. And I'm not saying that's wrong. That's absolutely right, because he is the alleged villain of the moment and he needs to be investigated. He absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. But it seems that Mandelson's suddenly gone on the back.
But there was a point when it was all about Mandelson. We weren't talking about it. But this is the thing. These police investigations, they take a very, very long time. We know even the most simple police investigation. If and when any charges are brought against either man, it will then be many, many months before any case comes to trial. And all that time, there are going to be people all over social media and people outside this country and beamed into our country on the internet saying, why is there a cover-up? Why is there a cover-up? But of course, at that point, it would be, if there is any charge, it'll become sub judice. We wouldn't be allowed to discuss it, and quite rightly, because someone's innocent until proven guilty. Once there is any charge, if there is one. But this is the trouble, isn't it? This stench of this. It's just everywhere, like this miasma of just stench that is just all over the palace. Do you, from your experience, I mean, we know we've got, people like Di Davies, who's former head of Royal Protection. Sure. We know we've got Dickie Arbiter, former press secretary to the late Queen. These are people incredibly well, knowledgeable. They've been at the top level of their game. They know their stuff. And there are an awful lot of them. Andrew Lammy, in his book, being very clear that, there's an awful lot of information that senior palace flunkies, should we call them, would have known. Would they have passed it on to senior royals? Is there a point for them to come out and say publicly what they did know, what they didn't know? And if they were say, if the likes of William want to say, I asked my uncle about this and he lied to me and he said it wasn't true. Even though there would have been evidence, we believe, brought to them and their aides, telling them that he was going to be a problem. If they covered it up, does that raise question marks about, and I think the allegation is specifically related to the king, does that raise questions about his future as our monarch?
It's possible. I mean, I have to say, Julia, I do not believe that the King and the Prince of Wales were involved in a cover-up, because if you've got the guys telling you one thing which clearly turns out not to be true, and let's remember, Julia, it's never the alleged crime.
Always, yeah.
Always the cover-up. That's always the cover-up is the thing. Now, the King himself has made it clear that he, rightly so, as many of your listeners and viewers have said, that nobody is above the law. He's made it quite clear that any questions the police want to ask, he is prepared to answer in any case. So he will, if I believe the King will eventually be asked those questions, and will Prince William, as to what they knew, when they knew, and how they knew what went on. So I think there will be an investigation. Yeah. It won't happen next week. It won't happen next month. But there will be an investigation, however it works, an independent judge, a parliamentary investigation.
But there will be something that goes wider than just the current criminal investigation. Yeah. Do you trust that the authorities, you know how things work. You've been at the top of your game as a royal editor for many, many years. You know that there are deals done, and can you not? Whether it's a celebrity, there are literally people whose jobs have been as celebrity handlers. Right, I know you've got a story about my celeb or my politician having had an affair. If we give you this story, will you guarantee not putting that on the front page? We know that happens, and we know the Buckingham Palace has done that over the years as well. Yeah. So do we trust that we're going to get to the bottom of everything?
Well, the problem with that is, and I've guilty is not the right phrase, but I've had problems with the palace where they've gone above my head on a story that I wanted to give out, and they've said, "Well, look, if we give you this little story, you'll dump this," which is, I'm sure it's happened to you as well. And you think, "Oh, I don't think this is right," using very colourful language. But that story always comes out eventually. It'll come out in your paper, it will come out in another paper. Yeah. And that gives you, it really does annoy you when you've got such a great story and it goes away. I'm confident there will be an investigation, and I'm confident it will be a correct investigation, like the post office, like the COVID inquiry. That we need to get to the bottom of who knew what and when. The problem we've got now is we've got so much stuff coming out, so many investigations. I think it's 12 investigations of it. Yeah. Variety.
Lost track. That was when we came on air. It's probably more now.
But we're now, and that, as I said to you before, Julie, I do not want the fact that women were trafficked into this country allegedly for sexual gratification of certain people. I don't want that to be forgotten. I think that's
100%,
much
100%.
more. I actually, in some way, think that's much more important than him leaking a couple of emails.
Yeah,
And
allegedly.
I'm not trying to belittle it
No,
at
I
all.
completely agree with you. I think that's where most people would I think would be as well. There are some very specific stories I want to ask you about, but I suppose first up, just your response to our conversation just then, that actually we are looking at, institutional rot, as Benedict says, and sort of circling of the wagons from institutions on so many different issues. Do you think there is sort of a case to answer there?
I certainly do. Well, I've been saying for a long time, that all of our institutions have been captured, and the disconnect between the British public and our institutions has never been greater. And of course, that undermines ultimately the British people's sense of trust in
Yeah.
our elites and the people that rule us. And it was the case until very recently that there were only two institutions left in the country in which people still had full confidence, and that was the armed forces and the monarchy. They rose above politics, they were outside the fray. And so it is, of course, very concerning, particularly for people like myself that spend most of my time defending the institution
Yeah.
of monarchy, to see it in this sort of a situation.
Yeah, I was quite stunned actually only a few weeks ago, and again, I have a funny feeling it might have gone down since. We were looking at a Savanta poll that said there was only 45% support for the institution of the monarchy. 35%, I think, was saying that they supported having an elected head of state. Now, look, I have my personal views on this, but I don't think necessarily that this scandal brings down the monarchy as an institution. But I do think it means there is a case to answer from senior royal staff, senior royals themselves, senior members of the government, senior police, and all the way down as well. And this is the issue. And again, I've written about this, I've spoken about this for a long time. This urge to institutions, whether it's an NHS maternity unit, a trust, whether it's the police, whether it's the military, whether it's the royal family, the government, civil service, whoever it is, this urge to close ranks, circle the wagons, try for the cover up, it never works. Not in the days of YouTube and social media and people being able to get this information out in other ways, even when you've got, the newspapers sewn up and they agree not to write it. This stuff ends up getting out. How damaging do you think? I mean, look, we know how damaging this has been for Andrew. He's lost the HRH, lost the title. He's going to be taken out of the line of succession. That's something the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, said he would support as well today. But how damaging do you think this is going to be for Charles, and also, crucially, also for the next head of state, and that will be William?
Well, we've actually had polling out recently over the weekend, I saw, where actually we had a slight increase in support for King Charles. The key thing is, I mean, look, when you're in the weeds of all of this, look, it all sounds terrible. And of course, we've been spending so much time discussing this. Yeah. Take a step out, zoom out, pan out, look at the nation as a whole, and they're not apportioning blame to the monarchy or to the royal family or to the king. It is the anger is directed squarely at Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Yeah. And I think we're getting a bit hysterical in this country. Calls for treason. I think also this idea of removing him from the line of succession. It seems really petty. I mean, I have
to say that is one I don't think Parliament should waste its time on. I mean, he's eighth in line, for goodness sake.
Well, also it would require unanimity. You need to get Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Jamaica. And that would start the Republican debate all around the Commonwealth. All 14 countries would need to consent, pass legislation, and you don't want to have that happen. And you could end up with one of the Caribbean nations saying, we're not going to agree unless you pay reparations for slavery or colonialism. Yes. This is a hornet's nest, but let's leave it alone. King Ralph wasn't a real story. It was fiction when everyone died and this man ended up being king. He is 7 heartbeats away from the throne. It's a complete red herring, as is this call for treason from Tom Tugendhat, who is a man prone to hysterics and needs to have a long lie down. This was the same guy who called for Sir Roger Scruton to be fired on the basis of a smear article in the New Statesman. Treason applies to people who are working with the enemy, trying to levy war, or trying to kill or harm the monarch. None of those apply to Andrew.
That's different. Although the damage to the monarchy has been done by certainly what has been alleged, again denied by the representatives of Andrew, in terms of giving documentation to Epstein, which was what's suggested in these files. In terms of where we are then, in terms of the future of the monarchy, what if you were giving advice to the king? and advice to Prince William. And again, a lot of the papers have gone on the front pages how William has said he's not in a calm state. He didn't watch Hamnet, one of the BAFTA award-winning films, because he said he needs to be in a calm state, and he's not in a calm state. I've got a question mark about whether that is a front-page story about the calm or otherwise state of the heir to the throne. But if you were giving advice to the senior royals, what would you be telling them to do now?
Well, quite clearly, I would say the days of never complain, never explain are over.
Yeah.
Particularly for this sort of an example, there does need to be increased transparency. We've had that from the King with these unprecedented 2 statements referring to his brother as Mr. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to reinforce he's a private citizen, saying that they will work with the police.
Hold on. This is the thing I don't get. What was he going to put out a statement saying, we will not work with the police?
No, but it's important.
Bare minimum stuff.
The point is there's a delicate path to go here, because the monarchy still has to seem to be somewhat distant. You know, there is a prestige, there is a mystique around monarchy. Charles de Gaulle famously said, prestige cannot survive without mystery, for one reveres little what one knows well. So it's different to any other institution having... You can't have a committee where you have Prince William and the King being called before a parliamentary committee to answer questions. But there does need to be more transparency, and that may well be that members of the royal household themselves, you know, the chamberlains or whatever, are called to give evidence, whether that's held in camera or however. But there does definitely need to be more transparency. And of course, the Prince of Wales firmly understands this. He knows he would go further, I'm sure, than the King has gone, and more quickly. And the fact, of course, that he said the things that he said at the BAFTAs yesterday just shows you how much he wants the nation to know. He really is understanding their anger.
Yeah, indeed. And again, I'm thinking back to when I was first a journalist, you back to the Queen's Annus Horribilis, 92, and I mean, just how difficult life was. With Windsor Castle had that awful fire. We had the announcement of the breakup of the heir to the throne, Charles and Diana's marriage, and the Queen did this big speech. But it was fascinating how out of touch both the government and the royal family were at that time, where remember John Major went on television and said, well, of course, we all in Parliament, and said, of course we will be paying, the country will pay for the new roof for Windsor Castle. And the country went, the hell we will, we're just going through a recession. The Queen Consorting will pay for it herself. And it was just a complete sort of failure to read the room. And I suppose the royals now have to be a lot more in touch, because with 24-hour rolling news and social media, there's a lot more scrutiny of them.
Yeah, well, that was the first year I started royal broadcasting, was the time of Diana's death. And I remember those baying crowds at the gates. Yeah. I did sort of think at one moment this could be the French Revolution, because the feeling was so strong. And the difference was, of course, that was 30 years ago. And back then, the media did close ranks around the monarchy. And the idea was, of course, that we needed to protect the institution. That's no longer the case. We live in a very different world 30 years later. But the reason we still have a monarchy in this country, whereas you don't have it in Italy and Portugal and elsewhere, is because our monarchy has always been able to basically read the tea leaves and move slowly, never being ahead of fashion, but changing. It still looks like it's the same institution, but it's very different to how it was 20 years ago. Yeah,
that's a very, very good point. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Now, that's been the history of our nation, hasn't it? That's very slow adaptation, as opposed to revolutions, which we've seen, and invasions we've seen across Europe. I always think that's what separates us so hugely from the European countries, which is not just the Channel. We have such a different history. Well, today the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, is talking to Parliament and telling them all about her big reforms to special education needs funding in schools. 1.7 million pupils have apparently got special education needs in schools in England, and over 480,000 of those have got EHCPs, which basically give you a legal guarantee that you will actually get help. But the government says they're going to spend an extra 3.4 billion quid. But it's over 3 years, and it's for 1.7 million kids on their special needs help. But we won't guarantee that not every child will keep their extra funding and their extra help. Well, let's talk about this with Stephen James. He's an award-winning teacher. A very good morning to you.
Hello, good morning, Julia. How are you?
Very well indeed. Thanks for joining me. I think most of us will know someone who's got a child who's having some help in school for special education needs. I mean, wasn't the case when I was younger, that's for sure. But we also, there's a massive variety. There are kids who need every bit of help. They need literally to be in a class of, 3 or 4 kids. And then there are some kids who, let's be honest, a bit bit of bedtime, a few healthy meals and a bit of discipline, they'd be absolutely fine. But in terms of what we know so far about this reform, is it going to make a blind bit of difference? Is it going to help or is it going to hurt kids?
Look, I think any money spent wisely by government will ultimately help. But what I will say with this is that, you know, demand has risen very sharply in the last couple of years. Why is that? Is that because people are more aware? Is that because of COVID? Is that because of a multitude of issues? Local authorities, as we know, are very cash strapped, and you know, schools in some places do lack very specialist knowledge. Now, and I think when I was teaching, you know, you would look at your class coming up to you and you go, right, okay, there's the needs in that class. I need to go and upskill myself on whatever maybe disabilities or special needs that those children have, and then implement that in your teaching for the following year.
Yeah.
But you know, what we're looking at now is hubs of excellence. Certainly, when I'm looking at Kent, hubs of excellence where there is specialist knowledge delivering teaching to those children.
The trouble with that, of course, is specialist schools offer, you know, kids are from many miles. You know, you can't just sort of, you know, get your kid on the bus or pop them in the car or walk to your local specialist school. It can be many miles away, and that's when you end up with these comedy taxi bills for kids for hundreds and hundreds of pounds a day.
But what we're also looking at there is not just the kind of the children moving there, it's also the teachers as well, and the CPD that can be delivered by them to us. So I remember going to a school called the Beacon here and learning from specialist teachers in dyslexia, and they would, you know, change my way of thinking about it, and then how I can deliver my, you know, quality first teaching to the whole class, not just to those children with dyslexia.
Here's the thing, though. As somebody went to a comp and it was taught in, you know, top group GCSEs with, well, O-levels as it was then, with people who could barely read. Mixed ability classes are quite difficult. And I'm not saying that the kid who's got dyslexia is thick and can't go. I'm not saying that at all, quite the opposite. The trouble is, you can't teach a class of 30 with a massive range of ability and needs. And a lot of parents of kids who don't have these special education needs worry that actually an awful lot of resources in mainstream schools are focused on these kids because there's this legal right. And, OK, some kids who are quite bright might get looked after. And actually, the rest in the middle get completely forgotten about.
Yeah, and you're right to point that out. But when that funding is secured through an HCP, that is ring fenced for that child and that is used by that child. However, I have seen examples in schools where you might have a group of children being led by a specialist teacher or a teaching assistant to be able to better deliver that teaching for that child, and it might be, you know, social skills that are needed with it as well. Yeah. But what we really need here is not a kind of race to the bottom in terms of how we're dealing with children with additional needs. It's about how we can make sure that all children in your school, in your class, can be, you know, propelled forward, and that's the real focus for me.
But again, we know that, you know, schools that are struggling to find a stand-in maths teacher, you know, are pretty much was going to be struggling to find some of these educational specialists as well. In terms of the extra funding, I mean, it looks like a drop in the ocean. I've worked it out as £675 a year per pupil. I'm not sure that covers much of the cost of those specialist teachers. A lot of parents say we're in this situation where we've got this massive explosion of kids who are claiming this. And again, is it lockdown? Is it people being more aware? There isn't an explosion in kids who are severely, say, autistic or needing extra care. It's only in the milder cases. There's a lot of concern that actually you've got the middle-class parents who are gaming the system, getting extra teaching for their kid and get extra time in exams. You've got working-class parents who are struggling, and frankly, a lot of parents who just frankly aren't doing the job of parenting very well, and they're also able to claim a shed load of extra benefits if they've got a child who supposedly has this disability. And you've got a lot of financial and educational incentives for parents to get their kids statemented, and at the same time you've got a bunch of parents who've got kids who desperately need the help, who say they're waiting years for assessment and their kids are getting worse and they're not getting the help. How do we have a system, which surely in a sensible, civilised country should manage, where we don't let people game the system, we don't let, you know, every other kid have considered to be special, but we do make sure that the kids who need it get it, and they get it straight away?
I think what you're pointing out there is the inequality amongst parents, and that is huge as well. And I've encountered parents before who've wanted to find a diagnosis for their child, and they come in and say, right, can I have some evidence for this? Can I get your opinion on that? And I'm not a child psychologist, so I can't make those judgments. But what they're doing is they're then going off and paying to a private practice to get that.
And by the way, if you pay
diagnosis.
Privately, you get the diagnosis you want.
Absolutely. And then they come into me and say, right, my child's got this this additional need.
Yeah.
What are you going to do for them? Expecting like their child will get an advantage over others.
Yeah, it's called cheating. We used to just call it cheating. Now we call it this, but you know.
Yeah, you could call it that, I suppose. But I think, you know, what again, we need to really focus in on what core education looks like. And I also think, you know, our curriculum is far too wide. We need a knowledge-rich curriculum. But if children are leaving school not being able to read, write, and count, that's a real problem for me. So regardless of where the spending
it's immoral. I mean, to leave a child like that, you know.
Well, and you know, your own children as a parent, your children leaving you to take on the wide world without being able to read and write is, you know, it's a reflection on you. So
although I've got some questions for those parents as well.
I'm sure you do.
Put down your phones, pick up a book, get them from the library. They're free. You know, sorry, but let's. And this is it.
We need to put education in the hands of the professionals, and you know, let teachers make decisions on you know, at the chalk face and go, right, this is my class. These are the specialists that I need to do my job effectively, to make sure that all the children in my class are able to progress, not just those with special needs or those that are high attaining. Okay, great to talk to you, Stephen James, award-winning teacher. Thank you very much indeed. Benedict Spence, I mean, were you special needs or high attaining, or were you just one of the average kids at your school? No, but I think genuinely, people's perspective, high attaining. I think people's perspective on these things are always down to what kind of school. Did you go to a comp? Did you go to school where you basically had everything and you would talk? Yeah, you know.
What do you think?
Yeah, but I think it massively affects your view on these things.
It's tricky because I really do believe fundamentally in the rights of parents to have as much say as possible over their children's education. But in this country, there has been a real breakdown, disconnect, whatever you might call it, where there are far too many parents who, for whatever reason, do not take that much of a role in their children's education. Therefore, the state needs to step in. Problem is, many parts of the state sector, in fact, also do not meet requirements. It's a really tricky cycle.
Don't believe for a moment there are 1.7 million pupils with special education needs in this country. There simply are. And every child that doesn't really have it, if you're getting the benefits or you're getting exam advantage, is taking away from another kid. Isn't it something you feel very strongly about, protecting our sort of physical national heritage as well? One of the things Reform UK has announced today is they would grant all churches listed status to prevent their conversion into mosques. This is Zia Youssef, the new sort of Home Affairs spokesman. He's saying immediate listed status will be granted to some 40,000 churches across the UK, preventing alterations affecting their historic character, restricting their change of use and imposing stipulations around their upkeep. How big an issue is it? And we know I've been to pubs which are old churches being converted. We see apartment blocks and the like. But how big an issue is it of churches being turned into mosques in this country?
Well, there are churches that have become mosques, and not just mosques, they've become other places of worship, gurdwaras of the Sikh community and so forth. And it is distressing for communities to see essentially their local community change so rapidly and so dramatically. Churches are one of the most visible indications of Britain's Christian heritage and its culture. And it doesn't matter whether you are actually a believer in Christianity or not, because the world we inhabit in Britain and the West, it was created by Christianity.
Absolutely.
Even if you're in an atheist Lib Dem, I don't know whether Ed Davies is religious or not, but all those liberal values you believe about, the rights of the individual, tolerance, human rights, those ultimately come down to Christian values from the Bible. Yep. And so this is a Christian culture. We should protect it. And as Yusuf quite rightly says, he says that we have a high trust society, but we're seeing that eroding quite rapidly because of the vast numbers of people who've come into it. And a high trust society is the greatest indicator for a country's prosperity and for its happiness. And we need to do all we can to shore up that high trust society. And that means people have to have around them familiar buildings, familiar sites, places that give them comfort.
Yeah, absolutely. As one of the examples would post the toppling of statues and all of that. Put a little plaque up explaining what this guy did, but you don't take it down. It is extraordinary, isn't it? You talk about high trust societies, and that's the interesting thing. We're constantly told by the Prime Minister, diversity is our strength. Being British is about diversity, I think he said last week, which is quite the strangest thing, because you've been very clear, and I've seen you do some really interesting debates on this online, and we've obviously talked about it on the show. We have not been a country that has actually got much diversity. Yes, there's been Protestants and Catholics, but actually in the last 1,000 years we've not been invaded until only sort of the Blair years. We really did not have much immigration at all. And actually, we've been a very homogenous country and people for most of our existence, haven't we?
Yes, we've had more immigration to this country in the last 20 years than in the last 2,000 years. This is remarkable.
Stunning fact.
And you remember, of course, when you had in the 1970s, the Ugandan Asians came to Britain fleeing Idi Amin. That caused huge controversy to have such a large number coming. That was 28,000 people. That was deemed to be outrageous. We get that every week now, gross, coming into this country, all right? We have been completely transformed. But what we're seeing, actually, is a sort of a deliberate attempt by our elite institutions to erase our history and to create a sort of a new year zero where you can create new founding myths. The new myths of Britain was always a diverse nation, that multiculturalism is embedded in Britain. And of course, you even had Rishi Sunak, a prime minister from the Tory party with a 50p coin, saying diversity built Britain. Absolute rot. Diversity didn't build St. Paul's Cathedral or the Houses of Parliament. You even have children's books saying that black people built Stonehenge.
Yeah,
this is a deliberate attempt to undermine British identity and as ideological subversion to basically erase any reason that an English person or a Welsh person or a Scotsman would have pride in their ancestors and in their heritage.
Or their flag or their history or what we've given the world. It is utterly bizarre. And again, it's lies. I mean, it's just simply lies. And it is Orwellian in terms of that. One of the things, of course, one of the reasons people come to this country is because we have a lot of freedoms. We've got, relative to a lot of countries, economic prosperity, and a lot of that's down to our democratic accountability of our rulers. And again, these things all go hand in hand, and again, a lot of the reasons why we are the country we are comes from our Judeo-Christian past, and all these things go hand in hand. It doesn't just, you don't just impose it, and as we've discovered with many of our wars in recent years, it's very difficult to actually bring Western liberal values and just plonk them on the other side of the world, because that's just not part of people's culture. And a lot of people find it very strange that people would come to this country and they or their children or children's children would then seek to basically undermine those values. And we've seen this, have we not, with a lot of immigrants coming from countries where there isn't freedom of speech, and certainly not freedom of religious worship, who for some reason think it's okay to try and change those rules here. Let me play you a little clip. It's a little video which, again, was Talk exclusive last Friday on Kevin O'Sullivan's Drive show. It was the moment where a WPC, a police officer, basically defends a Christian preacher in Whitechapel in East London, which is where I did my newspaper training, actually, to a bunch of men who say, look, we're all Muslims. And one of the things they say to her is, this is a Muslim area, and they don't want this man preaching his views on Islam or his Christian views. Here's the exchange.
I hear what you're saying. In this country, we have freedom of speech, the same way you guys have your freedom of speech. Now, you guys don't need to see eye to eye, and you don't need to agree, and you're all more than welcome to stand here and have conversations with them, but they're not being aggressive.
This is East London, this is Whitechapel, Bengali area also, Muslim area.
I understand that you guys don't want to hear it. I would recommend that you just move away and don't listen to him.
I mean, I absolutely love that line, Rafe. I would recommend you just move away and don't listen to him. You know, it's not your problem. You don't have the right to stop him. I mean, we were praising her earlier on the show, but as Benedict Spence pointed out, she was just doing what all police officers should do in that scenario. But that's not what's been happening. What did you make of that exchange?
Yeah, well, hats off to her for standing her ground like that. And we have our other policemen who perhaps wouldn't have acted that way. But what's so depressing here, of course, is the looks on their faces. They really think that they're in the right.
Yeah.
And obviously these people seem to have sort of London multiculti accents. So they were obviously schooled here, and yet they were never taught, apparently, about the importance of free speech. Those are our secular religious dogma, right? That is crucial to our identity in Britain, are our beliefs in free speech and tolerance for...
Well, it used to be. It used to be,
well,
right?
This is it. You don't have the right not to be offended in this country. And the problem is, once you start to have ghettoized communities like this, and Whitechapel is one of those communities, yes, they begin to become parallel states. And this is the problem. We're not becoming a United Kingdom, we're becoming a United Nations. And people are retreating into these ethno-nationalist silos where essentially they do think that their own culture and their own values and their own beliefs should take preeminence over their predominant views in the rest of the country. So we do need to have more of this pushback. I think it behooves all of us who have the ability to actually confront this when we can. Get more Christian preachers need to go outside mosques and preach and do that and have one of these Spartacus moments, because if you don't make a stand, if you don't resist now, then it's game over, because the Muslim population is going to double, perhaps even treble, according to the Pew Research Center, by 2050. So this issue isn't going to go away. And too often what we see from our government is people putting their heads in the sand, unwilling to confront the reality of the dark side of diversity. And this is one of the darkest aspects.
But again, if someone being Muslim, it makes no difference to me if someone's Muslim, Christian or atheist or Jewish or whatever, as long as they don't impose their views on other people or don't prevent other people from espousing those views, and certainly not in a violent way. But the trouble is, we have seen some supposedly community leaders of Muslim population, Muslim communities in this country, where they have basically threatened just as much, and it's not called out. And perhaps if our police and our government had actually stood up to that much sooner, the message would have been very, very clear that that's not going to happen here. And if you don't like it, then this isn't the country for you. And that goes for people born and bred here, same as me, who have that view. If you don't, there are plenty of countries you can go to where those views will be espoused. Fill your boots, go and enjoy it. But it's not happening in my country.
Yeah, quite right. But it should be said also, the polling is very scary on this issue. A majority of Muslims in this country, around 52%, believe in restricting freedom of speech to save religions from offence.
Yep.
And a similar number, I think it's 60% believe it should be illegal to show a depiction of the image of Muhammad. Look, the vast majority of Muslims in this country are well adjusted and integrated. That should be celebrated. But that doesn't mean we should shy away from the fact that they also hold, unfortunately, views that are incompatible with modern British life on certain issues. Over half of Muslims in this country believe it should be illegal to be homosexual, compared to only 5% of the wider population who hold those views. Those are discussions we shouldn't shy away from. Yeah. We need to discuss them.
Absolutely, couldn't agree with you more. Let's talk about a completely different story now with Peter Blexley, former Metropolitan Police Detective. Good morning to you, Peter.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. Look, we must talk just first of all about Lord Mandelson. He's been released on bail after being arrested on these charges of misconduct in public office. He's no charges yet brought, but he's released on police bail. There's been a lot of talk about why he was arrested and why, I wouldn't just let go, does he need to be arrested to have a conversation with the police, and why it would have happened late afternoon, especially for a man in his 70s. Can you talk us through the police decision-making on that?
Certainly. I'm going to hazard a guess. Now, every person, when they're arrested and taken to a police station, the custody clock starts ticking. Generally speaking, you've got 24 hours to detain someone. Yeah. But that doesn't all have to be in one block. We know that Mandelson was detained. So I suspect the detectives investigating him have deliberately left themselves that 16 hours or so in the bank, so to speak, so that should they need to rearrest him and re-interview him, they can go back and have another bite at the cherry. Yeah. As for why they arrested him around about 4 o'clock, I suspect that's probably a very smart bit of thinking, because I would imagine Mandelson would undoubtedly have wanted a lawyer present, and that lawyer may well have been in court or in the office until around 4 or 5 o'clock, and therefore available to go and sit next to their client. Okay, they're my guesses. I've got no... No,
it's very, very useful to know. Very, very useful to know. Let's talk about something which is absolutely extraordinary. We don't need to have any guessing at all. And this is the awful, awful story of those Nottingham killings, which took the life of 2 students, Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kuma, and also caretaker Ian Coates. The Nottingham killer, Valdo Calocane, we know was a severely, severely mentally disturbed man. But he was not sectioned, we're told, after a previous violent attack. In fact, there have been numerous violent attacks when he actually tried to break into a neighbour's apartment. So terrified was she jumped out of a window, for goodness sake, causing herself serious injury. But he was not detained because he was black. That's what the inquiry, which opened yesterday, has found. And it said that basically he was not committed in May 2020 to a psychiatric hospital because professionals considered an over-representation of young black males in detention and decided it was the wrong thing to detain him. This is going to blow most people's minds.
Correct. And can I please add, to Grace, Barnaby and Ian, who he killed, Calocane also very seriously injured. A number of people.
3 others almost died,
who were lucky to survive, and they are now living with lifelong injuries.
Very good point.
Calocane is a monster. And in my opinion, he smoked his way to schizophrenia. It was his fault. So when this ridiculous NHS mental health trust puts policy before protection, it ends up in bloodshed. That's what you get when you get this liberal, fluffy, woke ideology that says you must abide by a policy. No, no, no. That's nonsense. Policy should be ignored if it's focusing on race or faith or anything like that. It must be a policy that protects the public, men, women, children of all cases, of all creeds, colours, religions, faith, whatever. Protection before policy.
It's got to be the number one issue. Well, we had this whole idea of, care in the communities. It happened during my lifetime. The idea was getting people out of these horrible Victorian psychiatric hospitals. But then, they're going to be careful in the community. But they haven't been. They've been left to their own devices. They don't take their medication. They actually aren't getting cared for as they need. Now, whether or not someone has, I'm with you on the drugs, smoked themselves into these sort of psychoses or not, they need to be protected from themselves, and we need to be protected from them. I just find it utterly bewildering that at any point looking at someone, about whether or not there's a danger to themselves or other people, that you would consider, well, the statistics show we're more likely to detain young black men, so we probably shouldn't detain him because it'll probably be racist. I mean, that is, again, racist in itself. But maybe there's a reason. I mean, we know there's a reason why there'd be more males detained. That's obvious. They commit most crime. Young people, yes, they commit most crime. Young black males, maybe there's a reason in terms of the drugs they take or particular issues in terms of family backgrounds where they're more likely to show that level of violence. I don't know, but I doubt it's got anything to do with the colour of their skin.
Yeah, how about the research that I suspect that if it was thorough and accurate would show that some people from certain black communities have smoked their way through cannabis to psychosis and schizophrenia because it's marginally, if not considerably, more prevalent in their culture. Yeah. It's nonsense. Protection of the public has to come first. But we live in this lunatic society where people are chained to policies, whether it be whatever aspect of DEI ideology it is. And look what it's doing. It's causing bloodshed on the street and the death of beautiful, beautiful people.
Absolutely. But let's get straight to our next guest to talk about, wherever we are in terms of all these investigations and who knew what when relating to people's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Lord Foulkes is joining us. He's Labour peer and former minister under Tony Blair. Good morning to you, Lord Foulkes.
Good morning, Julia.
I mean, this story is getting messier and messier and messier with the arrest of Lord Mandelson yesterday. Of course, he's denied any wrongdoing in relation to his relationship to Jeffrey Epstein. We must keep stressing that. He hasn't actually been charged with any crime. But a lot of people are saying that this story is going to drag on. We still haven't got the information that people asked for in that humble address tabled by the Tories a few weeks ago, asking for information about his appointment as our ambassador to the US. But isn't this all coming back to Keir Starmer, where the whole thing is, this would be a story about a minister under Blair, a minister under Gordon Brown. And Keir Starmer has made it about his own poor judgment in appointing someone with such a poor track record to be our most senior diplomat only a year or two ago?
I think it's a tribute to British justice that a former prince and a peer have been arrested in the United Kingdom, whereas none of the people, as your caller said earlier, none of the people in the United States who've been mentioned in the Epstein files have been arrested at all. But, Julia, what I'm more concerned about is that no action has yet been taken in relation to the so-called Lolita flights into Stansted Airport, where there were young girls from Latvia, Lithuania and Russia transported in for sex. And Gordon Brown has sent a big dossier to the police. And this is really worrying. Of course, misconduct in public office is worrying, but the way in which these young girls were trafficked is extremely worrying. And I would hope that we will see some quick action in relation to that.
Well, we don't necessarily know the age. A lot of these women are just counted as female, but a lot of them were over age. But again, it's interesting. Gordon Brown's got this information now. I don't know where he's been for the last few years. Must have been busy doing something else. But you say no action. These revelations only came out, what, a week ago or so? That's, I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, I don't know if you've reported a crime to the police in recent years. If there had been action by now, I would have been absolutely bloody astounded.
Now, some time ago they came out, and I've put down some questions. I put down some last year, and I put down some a few weeks ago, because the border force and the airport will have information about the flights coming in, and this information must be available, and so they should be looking into taking some action. So I don't think you should play that down, particularly you as a woman, because that is really worrying, whether they were underage or not. The fact that they were being trafficked in
Why do I? I mean, I'm interested because this woman card is being played an awful lot by a lot of presenters about this. Why do I care more about women being victims of sex abuse than man should, or do men just not care?
No, I accept that. Yeah, I'm not just as concerned as you, but I would hope you would be concerned, and I would hope you would be pressing this.
I am, but the thing is, look, the reality is, and again, I wasn't aware those allegations had been available so early. That had escaped my knowledge. I'm trying to keep on top of all of these issues. But again, the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein are appalling. He's now dead. I suppose what I'm more concerned about mostly now is whether or not people in Britain were involved in those crimes of any sort, whether it was misconduct in public office or the abuse of young women, and whether that was allowed to continue with people in full knowledge of it because they were powerful people and well-connected or members of the royal family. That, I think, is a lot of the concern that I think a lot of my audience have, that there's one rule for them and one rule for us.
Absolutely. The rich and powerful have seemed to be able to do anything they want. And that is worrying, and it's still the case. I think particularly down where you are in London, the rich and powerful still get together and party, including the media, by the way. They turn up in all these parties as well. I mean, most of you in the media are more rich than politicians these days.
But no, people being friends, people getting together. Look, I mean, people will know. There are various people I'm friends with who I'll interview on the show, and I'm quite happy to monster them and take them apart if I think they're talking nonsense. Now, I'm of the view an awful lot of people in the media don't do that and don't hold people to account. And I agree. I'm pretty sure there's quite a lot of people in the media. I could tell you exactly how they vote based on who they give a soft soaping ride to. But how worried should we be? Because I mean, everyone's sort of putting their tuppence worth in now. And you've got Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader. He's tabling this humble address in the Commons today. There's going to be debate about what was known at the time that Andrew was appointed, as was Prince Andrew, as our UK trade envoy. Now, this is a man who, when he was a Lib Dem minister in the coalition government, was praising the work of Andrew and saying how outrageous it was that a Labour backbench MP was criticising him. And he says today, his justification today to the BBC was, I didn't really know much about it, didn't read my brief, which is remarkably similar to why he didn't look into the post office scandal. Turns out Ed Davey was a really rubbish government minister. He didn't know anything that was going on at all about anything in his brief. But
hindsight is wonderful, Julia, isn't it? Afterwards, it's easy to see what went wrong and say, oh, no, this shouldn't have happened.
There were plenty of rumours. There was stuff in the papers. There was loads going around about how appallingly behaved Andrew was and how he was not an asset. He was a problem.
I agree, and some people should have shouted louder. It was the same with the Mandelson appointment. I mean, I think Nigel Farage said it was an inspired appointment at the time. He's just the man to deal with that awful man in the White House.
Yeah, he did.
And it was only when the real truth came out that Keir Starmer moved quickly and sacked him at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Except the difference is that Nigel Farage, again, I don't think he was right to say that, but the difference is that Nigel Farage wouldn't have seen the security vetting. I don't believe for a nanosecond that the security vetting didn't say, this guy's got form, there's an issue, he's still mates with this guy, he stays at his home. Not ideal. I mean...
Keir Starmer is much better than you and the media give him credit for.
Is he?
I know him well.
What evidence do you have for that statement?
Yes. No, I know him and know exactly what he's doing. And
he doesn't know what he's doing. So how do you know what he's doing?
He admits when he makes mistakes and
no, he doesn't.
Yes, he did. He look at that. Show that again when he said, "I'm sorry." Look at the number of times.
He had to be dragged kicking and screaming to that after Mandelson was sacked.
Not at all. I would hope that
he defended him. He defended him.
I would hope some of you in the media would admit when you make mistakes from time to time.
I admit when I make mistakes.
But he is going to. He's. I think he's leading the country very well. And
but you may be alone in that. I'm not even sure his own cabinet
I'm certainly not alone. There are thousands, millions of people who are coming around to that.
He's got the lowest poll ratings of any prime minister
because
in modern history.
He's been monstered by you and the right-wing media.
Oh, me and the right-wing media. He gets and has had the most remarkably soft ride to the general election and since, from the BBC, Sky and others, who are absolutely card-carrying Labour Party members.
Oh, rubbish! Absolute rubbish. That's nonsense. None of them.
But nothing he's criticised for has been sort of a made-up conspiracy. It's all been of his own doing. He gets monstered by his own backbenchers. He gets monstered.
I criticised him on the winter fuel allowance decision, and it was a mistake. I wrote an article.
I thought he knew what he was doing.
But he changed it. He changed it.
He's had 15 U-turns. You think a man who's had to U-turn 15 times knows what he's doing?
You call them U-turns. What I say is listening to people.
But no. A good prime minister, a good leader, listens before he announces policy, particularly a policy that was none of the things he's U-turned on have been things that were actually in his actual manifesto. He just goes, oh, we're just going to ban jury trials for most people. We're just going to cut the winter fuel allowance. He U-turns because he has taken poor advice from people that he has chosen to appoint to advise him, so it's down to him. And then he doesn't talk to anybody else, doesn't talk to his backbenchers. He then goes ahead and does stuff, massively unpopular with the backbenchers, unpopular with the public, and then he has to U-turn. In what way does that say to you he's doing a good job?
Well, you've made up your mind, you see. You're attacking him constantly. You've been doing it
because he's a rubbish prime minister.
No, he's not. He's doing
Tell me one thing he's done that would suggest he's not a rubbish prime minister.
I think all the things that he's done in relation to Ukraine,
What?
Well, he's
continued the former policy of the last party.
At this very minute, Julia, he is leading. Oh. He's chairing the coalition of the willing.
Oh, so proud of him. And what's happening there? Nothing. Come on.
Of course it is.
Is that the best you've got? What has he done for people in Britain?
You ask Zelensky what's happening there. I'll tell you what he's doing, and that is helping working people, raising the minimum wage, employment rights for people.
Well, have you seen the unemployment rate?
The special educational needs.
Have you seen it? Well, the parents of special educational needs kids aren't happy. Nobody who works in that field thinks these reforms are good. And those reforms, by the way, are going to take years. Raising the minimum wage, that's great for people who've got a job until they don't have a job, because businesses are currently laying people off and they're not hiring new people. The unemployment rate has gone up as a result of that, and the national insurance hike. So you think that's a success?
So the chairman of these huge companies making millions of pounds and getting millions of pounds.
Most people don't work for huge companies. Most people work for small businesses employing under 100 people, and they can't afford.
The minimum wage is too much. They think it's too much.
No, they don't think it's too much. Those people don't add 26 grand's worth of value, so they don't hire them.
How much do you get paid, Julia? Could you tell us?
Well, more than the minimum wage.
How much? Come on, tell me.
What I'm paid is entirely my business and my employer's business.
Why is it your business?
Why is it? Because I'm not a public employee. No one else is made to pay. Not even my audience are made to pay my wages. My wages between me and my employer.
It would be interesting to know.
Well, what's that relevant? I've done minimum wage jobs, but that's nonsense. Oh, but that's I mean, I know what you're paid as a peer because that's in the public domain, because you're paid by taxpayers. So it's my business as a taxpayer and a voter. But it's not your business what I earn, because you don't have to pay my wages.
Well, we do eventually.
But yes, I earn a lot more than minimum wage. Of course I do. I've done minimum wage jobs, and most people earn more than minimum wage, funnily enough.
Good.
But raising minimum wage hasn't helped a lot of people. If you can keep a job, you'll be better off. But with the cost of living continue to go up, with energy and net zero and all of that, and with employers not taking more people on, they're not going to be able to negotiate pay rises. Overall, I think that people are going to be worse off. But you still think that's a good thing that Keir Starmer's done?
One of the things that you haven't mentioned, and most of the people in the media haven't mentioned, is that the economic situation is now better than it's been for many, many years.
I mean, what statistic?
Since records began, Julia.
Record in 1980. What statistic? Unemployment's up.
No, look, the economic...
Cost of living is still going. I mean, inflation's still above the Bank of England aim. On what basis do you think that my audience are listening to this going, you know what, never had it so good?
The Institute for Fiscal Studies director was on television saying that the economy is better than it's ever been. I think he knows better than you, Julia.
When?
He knows better than me.
I mean, can someone look that up? I'd love to see that quote. Lord, folks, we'll have to leave it now. We really will. I don't know why I bothered doing an economics degree. I clearly don't understand the economy. Susan Smith, she's the director of For Women Scotland, the ones who took the government to court in Scotland to basically prove that, well, you know, women are women and men are men, and it's a biological thing. Good morning to you, Susan.
Morning.
I think, again, and I've spoken to so many of the ladies at Sex Matters and others, and people who've been supporting your brilliant, brave campaigning, and everyone was saying, oh, you know, it's all over, we've won. And I remember saying at the time, oh, I wouldn't be so sure of it. And it's extraordinary how many organisations, private companies included, charities, but particularly councils, paid for by you and me in our taxes, are basically going, ooh, just not going to enforce the law. Tell us what it is they're supposed to do and tell us what they're doing instead.
Well, they're supposed to follow, as you said, the Supreme Court ruling, which was very clear that sex is biological and that if you provide services and spaces for women, they should be provided for on the basis of sex.
So what sort of thing would that be in terms of those facilities?
So if you run a leisure centre, councils obviously run leisure centres, the changing rooms in the leisure centres, if they're the women's changing rooms, they're for the women, the men's for the men's. Public toilets in the library, all these sorts of things. Or if you're running a women-only event, say, at the library, that's just for women. And it's really, really straightforward. Oh, the other thing, of course, the big thing is schools and trying to get this out of schools and ensuring that councils send a very clear message. And in fact, in Edinburgh, despite the fact that many of our councillors are robustly opposed to enforcing the law, they were told in no uncertain terms by the legal team at the council that they had to ensure that school toilets were single sex because otherwise they will get sued. Yeah. And this, of course, is what has happened in the NHS. We've just found out that the Darlington case costs the NHS £600,000.
No, it didn't. It cost taxpayers £600,000. That's the bit that bothers me. They are fighting against the law to enforce gobbledygook nonsense that they know categorically, because the highest court in the land has told them it's against the law, and they are using our money to do it. I think everyone involved in those cases should be sacked on the spot for wasting public money.
And there will be more. You know, there will be so many more because we've already supported parents who took their council in Scotland to court over the schools policy. And there's going to be more and more and more. And as you say, this money is public money and we are not awash with cash.
No. I think the NHS has certainly got better things to spend. And most local councils saying, oh, we've got no money, but they're still fighting it. A lot of them are saying, we're waiting for guidance. And we did have the Equalities and Human Rights Commission issue guidance, I think it was last September. And then Equalities Minister and Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson just sort of sat on it. And we know why she sat on it, because she's going to upset people on the sort of the woke side, because they're going to know, you can't possibly stop a man in a dress from going into a woman's toilet or changing room. Well, yeah, you can, because it's illegal. I don't understand why they can get away with this. I mean, is there not a legal duty of public bodies to obey the law? And is anyone... Again, I've always thought the same with private companies as well. You need people who are personally responsible and liable. So if you instigate that policy or you don't change the policy, you will lose your job. You will pay a fine yourself. You may go to prison or whatever it is, rather than, oh, we'll just fight it. If we lose it, we'll carry on as normal.
Well, we've been thinking this, actually. We've been thinking that we're getting to the point now where we will probably have to take action against individuals for misconduct in public office, very similar to what's happened to Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, who we were discussing earlier. Not for the same thing, of course, not on the same serious level of seriousness, but nevertheless, if you have a position of responsibility as a politician, it is your duty to abide by the law. You cannot go out there and tell other people at the risk of vast expense for the public that you are going to disobey the law. It's very straightforward. You know, the Supreme Court ruling wasn't difficult.
It was black and white. You didn't need to be a lawyer to read it. It was written in plain English. What was it? 8 pages. It was just, you only needed, frankly, about 8 words, didn't you, to tell us what everyone knew until about 10 years ago, what everyone knew and what 99% of the public know now, and they pretend to not know it. But again, you say, like, no, it's not as serious as, like, the allegations the likes of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is facing. Actually, do you know what? I think, you know, a little girl going into a school toilet and having a boy there, or a nurse, you know, working in a hospital, having to get down to her bra and pants and having a man in a wig and a bra watching her do it. I think that's pretty darn serious.
It is serious. And, you know, I come back to Bridget Phillipson. I would say there's a real failure there. She's got the guidance. She says it's crystal clear. Well, lay it.
Yeah.
And, you know, if she doesn't have the guts or the intelligence to do what she is obliged to do, she should resign and let somebody who can do the job. If she wants to be in politics, she needs to show leadership.
Absolutely.
And she is failing. Absolutely.
Susan, I mean, I think in a battle between you for Women's Scotland and Bridget Phillipson, I think we all know we've got to put our money on, because you do not walk away from a fight, and we bloody love you for it. I think a lot of us were absolutely horrified and outraged, including a lot of Labour MPs. Actually, we'll talk to one later in the show, Carl Turner, about this plan to abolish jury trials for all but the most serious crimes. The reality is, the vast majority of crimes aren't tried by a jury already, are they? But how important is it that people have a right to a jury trial for what we would call lesser crimes than murder, manslaughter and rape?
Well, Julia, this is another car crash policy from this government. Not only is it not going to work, it's not going to deliver what the government claim is their intention by abolishing jury trials for about 50% of the cases that currently have jury trials. So it's one thing to push a policy that people don't think they like. It's another to push a policy that everyone who's an expert in this field says isn't actually going to work. And there's a principle involved too, which is the principle of fair justice and equal justice under the law, which is a very apt thing to discuss at the moment. And the reality is, the reason for delays, the reason for a court backlog at the moment has got nothing to do, Julia, with juries.
No, there is no shortage of people who can be legally required to turn up to sit on a jury, as I was a few weeks ago. The shortage is of courts being open, and of judges and of barristers and the like. But this is the thing, we're told this is going to make a real difference. It's not, I mean, it's literally not even going to touch the sides of the backlog, is it? It's
not going to touch the sides. So about 95% of all criminal cases are dealt with in the Magistrates' Court anyway. Only the top 3 or 4% of cases are dealt with in the Crown Courts. Many of those will plead guilty or be resolved or collapse in some other way. A tiny percentage of cases have a jury trial. More than 50% of those end in conviction. Juries themselves probably only add a few hours to a case, whereas many people will find that if they're charged with an offence, it's multiple months, sometimes even years, before the police end up charging and the Crown Prosecution Service end up making a decision about charges. So those are the years of delay. The court system itself is not responsible for that, except we need more courts working, because many of them are dilapidated, no heating, no electrics, no plumbing. So not all of the courtrooms are working. That's underinvestment. Not enough senior judges. But the principle of having a jury goes back 800 years. I mean, we exported this principle around the world. It will make a difference. And it's going to backfire, Julia. And I'll tell you why. Because the government wants to save a few pence with this madcap idea. And they'll end up spending more money on the prison service because we'll end up with more convictions. Because if you have a judge sitting alone, he or she is likely to be more cynical about a defence. He's likely
because they've seen it all before. A jury will perhaps give a defendant more of a benefit of the doubt. And we know in the Magistrates' Court the conviction rate is much higher than in the Crown Court. So you're going to get more people sent to prison, more people having to be invested in the prison service
for a policy that is going to backfire, is not going to bring about what it
is quite extraordinary. We're told there's going to be some extra money being put in to have more court sitting days and the like. But again, it was something like a third of courts aren't sitting at any one time. When I did jury duty a few years ago, I was actually Southwark Crown Court, so impressed with the clerk, so impressed with the judge, so impressed with the procedure, and really impressed with the jury I sat on in terms of how seriously we all took it. And I felt a renewed sort of sense of belief in our system. But here's the thing: although we've had the jury system, you cannot have your freedom taken away from you unless you've been judged by your own peers, not someone over there, people just like you sitting there and looking at it, objectively. And the wisdom of crowds, very, very, very well documented. Although we've seen some jury decisions lately that I would massively question the wisdom of. But we've exported this around the world, and the Anglosphere world, the juries are normal, but not so in Europe, in Germany, countries like that. Well, I don't think we all walk around saying, well, you wouldn't get a fair trial in Germany. They don't have juries. They have panels of judges. Why is our system so much safer than their system?
Well, people have different traditions, of course, but the system has worked very well. I spent 17 years in the criminal courts prosecuting and defending as a barrister in practice before I went into politics and later became Solicitor General and Attorney General. I have great faith in the jury system. I've invariably felt that whether they acquitted or convicted, 9.5 times out of 10, I sort of understood and agreed with why they'd done that. I just think that it's not a flawless system, nothing is, but it's the best I think that human beings can
come up with.
Yeah,
so why get rid of it?
It works well.
What do you make of again, this is such a classic New Labour thing, which is that Lammy pushing for judges to be assisted by AI. Now, I'm using AI quite a lot. You can make quite funny pictures of, Peter Mandelson sipping a cocktail on a beach in the British Virgin Islands within seconds. It's great fun. I can check some facts about what has someone tweeted about this subject or over the years, etc. But I've also looked up things where I've got literally, this person, tell me about this person, as if it was a Wikipedia check. And AI genuinely has come up with that this person, I was saying, had a 3-year prison sentence for a conviction for something. And tell me more about this. Turns out in the next, response, he hadn't at all. That is incredibly dangerous. We've seen the Maccabi Tel Aviv case with
exactly.
that they used AI pretending that there was a match that had been played that had never existed. How can we trust AI being used in our court system?
We can't trust it at the moment. It's not ready yet. Whether it will be in due course, I don't know. But as you say, Julia, the Maccabi case is an example where the police said AI had an hallucination, I think is the word.
But this is very common.
It's very common, and there have actually been cases where lawyers, both in the US and I think here in the UK, have got into trouble for citing cases to the judges in court that they had looked up on AI, and there were another hallucination. The case didn't exist.
Yeah.
So it's not, we can't trust it yet. Maybe it can help in some administrative and clerical things. But I just say the irony is, though, talking of AI, that part of the real reason for the delays, there's nothing to do with juries, is because of the increased amount of digital data as evidence. And that actually is one of the real reasons for delays in the court system.
Going through someone's phone and all their emails, and we've seen current cases at the moment as well. Apparently, the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, who's in charge of equalities as well, thinks that boys should be allowed to wear dresses to school. Dresses obviously often the girls' uniform. The boys don't wear dresses because it is the norm in our society that boys don't wear dresses. And let's talk about this with Maya Forstatter. She's Chief Executive of Sex Matters. Good afternoon to you.
Hello, Julia.
On the face of it, one could argue, when we say, look, I don't really care what anyone wants to wear, I mean, as long as you're vaguely appropriately attired for the job you're doing or the weather, I don't think it makes any difference whether a boy's wearing a dress or trousers or shorts. Does it? Girls wear trousers and shorts and it doesn't bother anybody, and that's traditional male attire. Would it be an issue if a boy turns up to school wearing a dress?
Well, it depends on the school. It depends on the school uniform. If the school doesn't have a uniform, then, as you say, children can turn up wearing, fairly much anything. But if the school has a boy's uniform and a girl's uniform, then, schools are quite careful about their uniform. They check what kind of socks children are wearing. And in that situation, if a boy turns up in the girl's uniform, he's asking to be treated as a girl.
Yeah.
And I think is where Bridget Phillipson has fallen down. Of course, if a boy wants to put on a dress in the dressing up corner in primary school,
yeah,
nothing wrong with that. But what we shouldn't be saying is that boy is socially transitioning. That boy is asking to be treated differently from other boys.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. If a girl, I'm thinking, I've only had a daughter, but we had lots of friends who had boys and things. But my daughter wants to dress up as Buzz Lightyear. It doesn't mean she actually thinks she's an astronaut, or indeed that she is a boy who's an astronaut. I mean, that's not how it works. And girls will dress up as superheroes who are male. And you probably see less of the boys dressing up, perhaps in more female clothing, because perhaps the parents steered them away from it. It's more socially acceptable for girls to kind of wear pretty much what they want. You can dress in what has been traditionally viewed, maybe in the 1950s, as male clothing, but would be considered completely normal female clothing now. But there is still a lot of people do have an issue with a man dressed up in what would be judged as traditionally women's clothing. And I sort of wonder to myself, why does that bother me? Why would I not want someone turning up with a man in lipstick and heels? Clearly a man, but using female clothing. But is the issue here that it's about the message that the child and the other children get about rules, about uniforms, or about this social contagion, this look at me? And it does, we know the trans thing is social contagion, and a lot of it's also being different, wanting to get attention and things like that. Is that more of the concern?
I think it's both. Clothing is just clothing, but dresses are not clothes for boys. If you sent your daughter to primary school in a skirt and her skirt got paint on it or something, and they put her in something from the lost property and she came home in trousers, you'd think fine.
Yeah.
But if that happened to a boy and he came home in a dress, you'd think something is odd here. There is something...
Is that because we'll be told we're all bigoted?
No, it's because dresses and skirts are not conventional clothing for boys and men, and for men we know that it can be a sexual thing. If you see a man dressed up as a schoolgirl, that's not just clothing, that's a fetish. And then you have rules. In the same way, in a hospital, the surgeons, the doctors wear a different outfit from the nurses and from the orderlies. That they're just different colours of scrubs, but if you switch over the colours, terrible things could happen.
Yeah, there are rules, and it's interesting you talk about the fetish aspects. That's something that actually perhaps I've steered away from to a certain extent, because again, we get called transphobic just for saying a man can't become a woman. You've had plenty of this over the issue. Basically, you lost a job as a result of this, and I've been a fantastic fighter on this front as a result. But there's quite a lot of evidence. Again, there are people who genuinely have body dysmorphia, and they genuinely do believe in their heart of hearts that they have been born in the wrong body. Now, they have not been born in the wrong body, in the same way that someone who believes that I've got too many limbs because I've got two isn't born with too many limbs. They're just simply not born in the wrong body, but they may genuinely feel that. There are people who, as we know, particularly also, sexual predators who pretend that they think this so that they can gain access to women's safe spaces and to get into women's prisons and get a softer sentence in an easier prison and things like that. But there is also this group which are it's fetishists who get a kick out of wearing women's underwear or wearing women's clothing, and get a kick out of the power play of that. And this is increasingly something that is being talked about, and perhaps increasingly something that we should openly be talking about. It that actually a lot of the time, and again, maybe not so much in schools with much younger children in primary school, but actually saying that yes, men can wear this clothing. You're basically saying, please wear your fetish interest in public, at work, on public transport, and we'll all have to say that's fine, when we wouldn't think it was fine in any other circumstance.
Exactly. And lots of people have odd things that turn them on. That's fine.
Fill your boots,
private life, but don't bring it to work. And that's quite different from a boy dressing up in a princess dress in primary school. These things shouldn't be confused.
Well, it's very interesting, actually. I know somebody whose grandchild was a boy, was wearing a dress and was, I think, being encouraged by the mother. And the question was, well, do you know that you're a boy? Yes. But then you need to wear a boy's uniform. And it seems to me it's like those parents who say, I mean, if you want to take your kid to the supermarket in a Batman outfit, that's fine. That's fine. But you perhaps wouldn't take them to a funeral wearing a Superman outfit, because you have to wear appropriate clothing. We often have to wear it for work, for a wedding. You know, you wear don't wear a denim jacket to someone's wedding, I would say, was a basic, requirement. Looking smart, things like that. And is this actually a lot of this also? There's parents who are just basically saying, yeah, my kids can just do whatever they want.
I think it's come from the schools. I mean, if the schools hadn't gone down this road of socially transitioning children, then most parents. I mean, you choose the school your child goes to, and if freedom of expression is more your thing, then you send them to school with no uniform. If you send them to school with a uniform, you expect your child to follow the uniform.
I don't think a lot of parents have much choice. Also, schools can change a lot. They get a new head teacher and then, all bets are off.
That's true. I think a lot of the responsibility is on schools. They should never have said that they could socially transition.
No. Well, a lot of responsibility is on education secretaries too, as we've discussed with you and many other of your members of Sex Matters. They should just enforce the law, which is very, very clear about men and women and boys and girls.
Absolutely.
What would be so hard about that? Trevor Cavalier, he's former political editor of The Sun. Good morning to you, Trevor.
Hi, Julia.
Well, those figures that came out since, just before we came on air on asylum and immigration, I absolutely know, without a shadow of a doubt, the government are going to be so chuffed about this. Isn't it great that we've seen a 13% drop in the number of study, work and family visas issued last year compared to 2024? Isn't that fantastic? They're going to say, isn't it great? Asylum claims have fallen by 4%. Isn't it great that we've got the asylum seekers in hotels at its lowest level in 18 months or so? Still higher than it was when Labour came to power. But they're going to point to all of this as being a great success. And the British public are going to go, are you kidding me?
I think some of your listeners have already expressed this pretty strongly and coherently so far. And I think that they're absolutely right. What on earth are we doing as a sovereign country, allowing people simply to walk in their hundreds, in their thousands, in their hundreds of thousands indeed, without permission, breaking the law and arriving as illegals right from the word go. And I think it must be a huge tribute to the Starmer-led government that they find it so attractive to come here.
545 migrants yesterday, busiest day of Channel Crossing so far this year. Basically, it was the first warm, nice day. But it doesn't seem to matter who's Prime Minister, doesn't seem to matter what colour rosette they're wearing, doesn't seem to matter what they say, what they're going to do. The main determinant of the number of migrants who arrive illegally on our shores is the weather.
Well, yes, it is. I mean, the first duty of any government, whichever flavour they may be, is to defend the country. And whichever way you look at this, and OK, the left have taken over the English language, but this is an invasion.
Yep.
And the people who are coming in have nowhere to go. They've got no money, no employment because they're illegal. So they know perfectly well that they're coming in to be housed at our expense and fed at our expense and treated with medical care at our expense, but with no future determined for themselves. This is a gamble on their part that is pure desperation in the eyes of some because of where they originally came from. But they've come through Europe in order to get here. So this is a destination, it's a magnet to immigration, and it's down to all of the governments we've had for the last 20 years.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we've become more of a magnet to Zach Polanski's Green Party, which is riding high, doing very well in the polls. I mean, well, behind Reform, obviously, and Labour, but really, snapping at the heels of Labour. And the expose in the Mail yesterday of Zach Polanski's Green Party's immigration policy, basically, no borders, come on in, no one's illegal. You can work if you want from day one, use the NHS, we'll give you a house for free. Again, for free. Where these magical house? Is there a magical free house tree that I hadn't heard about? And if you don't want to work or even bother to look for work, we'll give you a universal basic income, which most people say would be around the 12 grand mark. I mean, genuinely, we will have millions of people marching across Europe to come and get in those boats at that point.
The alarming thing is, Julia, that the latest polls down in or up in Gorton and Denham.
Oh no! Sorry, Trevor, stop! I'm going to stop you. You're used to the newspapers. We can't. Yeah, absolutely, literally, legally cannot even discuss the actual by-election.
Forget about Gorton and Denham. The polls are showing that the Green Party is being supported by almost as many people, and in some cases more than the two major parties, especially the Tories. That is a huge indictment of our voters. I mean, honestly, voters get the politicians they deserve. And
I totally agree with you.
And if indeed the Green Party does well in any election at any time, and in fact becomes the tail that wags the dog in some sort of coalition, then we deserve the fate we are doomed to have.
Well, yeah, I mean,
basically lawless party.
I think that a lot of people would agree with that. Let's turn our attention to other sort of Westminster politics, and that is this Mandelson arrest earlier this week and the extraordinary revelation that he put out to his friends that just happened to leak it to the media, that it was because he was the police thought he was going to be a flight risk to the British Virgin Islands, and this was totally untrue because we know he's got such a good record of always telling the truth. We know that obviously that wasn't going to happen, but apparently the tip-off came from the Common Speaker's Lindsay Hoyle. Extraordinarily, we know this because the police revealed this to Mandelson. They've now had to issue an apology to Sir Lindsay Hoyle. He apparently, on a trip to the British Virgin Islands last week, met with senior people, and someone told him a wealthy supporter of Peter Mandelson, he's got plenty of those, had apparently offered him refuge in the British Virgin Islands. But I mean, this is Keystone Cops farcical stuff from the Met, only at the very beginning of this investigation. What do you make of it?
Well, I think we've got a Keystone Cops operation right across the country. I mean, when you find in one part of the country someone's been shot in the face and the throat and the police don't notice that it's not a natural death, I mean, where do you begin with the failings of our police forces? But in this particular case, you've got long-haul Lindsay Hoyle, who makes a profession outside being Speaker of travelling the world, mostly at taxpayers' expense.
But to very nice places.
To hugely nice, nothing unpleasant along the way, all 4 or 5 star hotels, private flights and so on. Anyway, he just happened to be in the British Virgin Islands for another of these very important business flights when one of his contacts over there tipped him off apparently about this rumour. And of course, it may well be, I don't know this, I'm making this up as I go along, could it have been planted by the Mandelson people in order to confuse the police even more than they are already confused, to line up the possibility of a claim that he's not going to get a fair trial and therefore the case is dismissed before it ever gets to court? Could you imagine Peter Mandelson stooping to that sort of
absolutely not
chicanery?
Of course not. But that's the thing. I mean, the plot things. But again, the whole thing is just already looking fast, as all of this has done. And again, a lot of people are saying, why have there not been investigations before now into claims? Gordon Brown suddenly now the arch investigator when it comes to both Mandelson and indeed Andrew of Mountbatten Windsor as well. We're going to see how this one goes. But of course, both men have been arrested on misconduct in public office charges, but have not been charged with any crime and have both denied any wrongdoing in relation to Epstein. Let me bring you on to one other topic, though, Chagos Islands, because we keep thinking this deal is on, it's off, it's on, it's off. We've had Donald Trump 1 week saying it's a terrible idea, 1 week saying it's the best deal that Keir Starmer can get. Most recent comments that it's a terrible idea, it shouldn't happen. We were told yesterday by a government minister that the Chagos deal was, quote, on pause, and then we were told that was a slip of the tongue and it wasn't true. Do you think we are ever going to have that Chagos deal? Are we actually going to hand over British sovereign territory to Mauritius for no legal, moral or defence or strategic or diplomatic or economic reason whatsoever, and then pay them for the privilege of renting back the Diego Garcia military base?
I suspect we won't, but who knows with this government as it flounders along, not knowing where it's going from one day to the next, constantly being buffeted by outside events, not least by Donald Trump, who has twisted and turned on this almost as much as the British government has in its turn. I mean, this is a very murky, the more you learn about the Chagos Islands and the deals with Mauritius, and now the challenge from the Maldives for the same territory, the murkier it becomes, because this is a very important strategic base for the American armed forces in Diego Garcia, and they don't want that threatened in any way by a possible deal with pro-China Mauritius. At least that's what it appears to be on the surface. And yet, if you look deeper into this, it's a deal which the American government itself, and for a while, Donald Trump himself, was supporting. Yeah. So, I mean, where do we go with this? There's a very tangled problem of our colonial heritage. We're terrified of being actually overruled publicly by the United Nations. And so we're desperately scrambling around to find a deal. And Trump is actually making it very, very difficult.
Yeah, well, I mean, we shouldn't have any deal whatsoever. There are territory, end of, nothing to discuss. But that would be too sensible for a bunch of human rights lawyers in government, wouldn't it? Cost of living, because fundamentally, when it comes down to everything, that's pretty much what decides how people vote. And we're constantly told that our energy bills are going to be going down. And we did see that announcement, didn't we, from Ofgem, the energy price regulator, who said that our bills were going to go down by, on average household, £117 from April. But the government had said that it was £150 reduction. So which is it? Well, Paul Johnson is the former director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies and joins us now. Hello, Paul.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us. Well, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor's under fire because she had promised that we were going to see our energy bills fall by 150 quid. Well, originally we were told they were going to fall by 300 quid over this Parliament, not looking likely at all. But basically the numbers the government gives don't seem to match up with the actual reality of the bills we pay. Tell us what's going on.
Well, I think we should believe Ofgem on this one because they're the ones who are setting the cap. What's going on, I think, is that Rachel Reeves gave her number on the back of some genuine reductions in the charges that the government is levying on our bills to support green policies and warm home discounts and all those kinds of things. So there's some genuine reductions there. And then she was kind of having an estimate of what the market changes will be. As it's turned out, the overall change is a bit less than she had suggested. I mean, the consequence is that, as you say, a cut of more than £100, which of course is good news. I mean, the thing that's very odd about the way that the government has done this, and this was announced in the budget, is this reduction lasts in their public finance numbers for the next 3 years, but then it's supposed to come back again at the end of the Parliament. Now, it won't, of course, because we're not going to have a big increase in our energy bills in a year before an election, but that helps to make the numbers add up. I mean, what's happening here is that we're moving some of the subsidies off energy bills onto tax bills. It's not that we're stopping these things. We're still
paying for them. It's just it's moved on to tax. So if you're on lower income and paying less tax, you are paying less. But people who are on higher incomes probably paying more because they're paying more of the income. Which I suppose people would argue was a bit fairer. But this is the thing. We saw those sky high energy bills back in 22, 23 after the invasion of Ukraine. And I mean, I was looking at my bills. I mean, absolutely eye-watering. I can remember actually consciously going like, right, I'm not having the heating on. I feel the cold. I'm sitting there wearing a puffer jacket and 4 fleeces under a blanket, freezing to death. And then gave in. The bills were so high. Lots of families really, really struggling. People still in debt today because of that. And they have come down a lot, but they are still way higher than they used to be, aren't they?
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about people still being in debt. As you say, there are a lot of people still in debt. And actually, one of the things the rest of us are paying on our bills is effectively to cover a lot of that indebtedness. There's a lot of complicated things going on within our bills, some of which reflect the cost of gas, some of which reflect government policy, some of which reflect other redistribution within the system. But you're right, bills still remain high, considerably higher than they were pre the Ukraine crisis, and that is a big issue, particularly for people on relatively low incomes.
Yeah, indeed. And also when we do still have the huge issue. I mean, again, the cost of living, inflation still going up, and again, it's something Donald Trump reckons with in the State of the Union speech in America as well, which is that yes, the inflation rate has gone down, but the prices of things are still going up. They're just going up at a slightly lower rate than they were going up before. But people are still feeling the pressure on their pockets. They're still seeing those bills going up in every area. Their taxes going up marginally as well, for each extra pound they earn, and people are struggling. And one of the things that people see very clearly is people notice their council tax bills, don't they? And they notice their energy bills because these are things they see. They come in every month, or council tax bill, you often get it at the beginning of the year. But when it comes to energy bills, when Ed Miliband, the we're going to destroy the country, send us all back to cave secretary, when he says, whatever we pay is going to be down to international gas prices, and the only way we're going to escape that is whether we rely on solar and wind here in the UK, and we're not dependent on petrostates and tyrants. This is a refrain he uses in every interview, despite the fact that most of our oil and gas that we get from abroad is from America and Norway and France. So it's not from petrostates and tyrants, other democratic allies of ours. But also, if the cost that we pay for gas and things like that, which is a massive impact on our energy bills, if that is totally down to just international prices, how come when the wholesale price plummets, we don't see across the world, we don't see that benefit? And how come America has got prices that are 4 times lower than us, and the most of mainland Europe has got prices about half ours as well? Why aren't they experiencing the same international market price fluctuations that we apparently experience?
Okay, well, there's a lot in that question. So, I mean, first of all, the US has access to much cheaper gas than we do, and it's not, in a sense, almost part of the international system. They're just paying a lot less for their gas.
But why? We're told by Miliband, if we actually drill for more gas in the North Sea, it'll just go on the international market, so we'll pay the same price.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's crackers not taking gas out of the North Sea. I mean, it doesn't help anyone, the fact that we're importing it rather than producing our own. I mean, that is, I don't see the sense in that. In terms of our costs, I mean, it's a combination of the, as you say, the cost of gas internationally, but there's also a lot of other things that we're paying for. So we're paying for the grid, which is linking to North Sea wind generation and all those other things, and trying to get electricity down from the Hebrides or the Orkneys all the way down to the south of England is incredibly inefficient. And expensive. And actually just the way that we set our prices are different from those that you get in other countries. And you're right, so it's not just households. I think even more importantly, we have the highest cost of industrial, and I think of anywhere in the advanced nations, and that is down to the structure of our system. And of course,
but there's no structure of our system. Government decisions,
government designs,
and huge amount of taxes as well.
Yeah, whatever you think of net zero and however important you think that may or may not be, it is clearly increasing the costs of energy in the short run, because if it wasn't, we wouldn't have to subsidise doing this. And we do subsidise it. We have a particular form of contracts with the producers of this stuff which guarantees them a particular price. And if this were cheaper, then we would do it irrespective of
absolutely, and the market would have got involved, and
balance those things off.
I hate to tell you, it's not just short term it's going to be more expensive, it will be long term, other than the fact that when the lights go off, everyone will go, we're done with that now, it's not going to happen anymore. Can I just ask you one other question in terms of stats we've seen today? Well, the stats we've been looking at, the NHS doubling of the amount of money we're spending on it, 100 billion to 200 billion over 17 years. It's a long period of time. Aging population, far more expensive drugs and treatments that have become available in that time, allowing a bigger population, 10 million more people, etc., etc. We're told by Lord Bethell, former Conservative Health Minister, that we haven't seen any increase in health impacts. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think a better way of thinking about this, actually almost a more shocking way, is that if you look at the turn of the century, about a quarter of our public service spending went on the health service. It's now well over 40% of our public service spending. So that's just telling you how much more of the state and of the economy the health service is taking up. And if you look over the last 15 years or so, we've had pretty much flat life expectancy over that period, after 2 or 3 decades of very fast increases in life expectancy. And the NHS is definitely well down the international rankings in terms of its treatment of a whole series of things, particularly some cancers and so on. Despite the fact actually we pay a pretty average, I mean, just as much as other countries. It's not that the NHS is underfunded or that our health system is underfunded relative to what a number of other countries spend. So there's absolutely a problem there. Now, as you say, part of the reason for the increases is the change in the structure of the population and all those sorts of things. But this is not an efficient system in the way that actually, if you look at some of the European systems, which are mostly, broadly speaking, free at the point of use, but differently structured. Some of them are social insurance systems, some of them have some private top-ups. Actually, in most things, we are somewhere between the US and Europe. We're often considered to be a bit mid-Atlantic. We're more European than the Europeans when it comes to our health service. We have less in the way of the social insurance and private top-ups, and a system which it doesn't treat anyone well. It treats its staff terribly. It treats doctors and nurses terribly. And we've seen the report today on maternity services treating new parents.
And patients very badly as well. Yeah, it's almost like it's not a great system, but hey, it's our NHS and apparently we love it. Talk about some stats, shall we? Lots of stats on the NHS, but also lots of stats on immigration today. Let's start with immigration. There's new figures out from the ONS. You used to do, crunch the stats for that official body. Look, a lot of these figures look really good. 13% drop in the number of work, study and family visas last year compared to 2024. Although I mean, we're still looking at 757,000, 750,000 of those being granted. Asylum claims down by 4%, but we're still looking at more than 100,000 people doing it. Asylum seekers in hotels falling to its lowest level in 18 months. 30,000 people being housed in asylum hotels at the end of last year. That's down from about 38,000 the previous year, but it's still about 1,000 higher than it was when Labour came to office. Small boat crossings, though, did surge by 13% last year. But most of those stats, I can see government ministers are going to be saying, you know what, haven't we done a good job? We've done all that. But the reality is, as we know, with yesterday, 545 Channel migrants arriving on boats when the weather was nice. The weather has more to do with these policies than any official statements. What do these stats tell us?
Yeah, so if we start with the small boats that we've seen, obviously, so this is the most up-to-date figures that we've got, and what we're seeing for 2026, Julia. So remember when Starmer came in, the first full year under Keir Starmer, we saw an increase in the number of small boats coming over. And 2026 year to date is actually up again on what we saw last year as well. So we are seeing these increases in small boats. On the asylum figures that have come out this morning, so yeah, we've seen 100,000 asylum claims. Pakistan still tops the list. I'm always surprised when that comes in because obviously Pakistan is normally what you would class as a safe country. The latest data for the final quarter of 2025 that we've had as well, Pakistan tops the list as well there.
And that's for asylum seekers or legal visas?
No, so it's basically people who've come over legally through kind of visas and then they've gone into the asylum system. So
I've come over here, I've worked here or I studied here, and then it turns out I can't go home because I'll face persecution of some sort.
Yeah, and that's the most common country and continues to be the most common country. And interestingly, we always talk about the number of men coming over on small boats. The number of men who come over legally then go on to claim asylum. It's about 72% of those are men as well. So they dominate those figures, interestingly. Yeah. So
very interesting.
Why are there always more men who need to claim asylum than women? That's always an interesting
I would think particularly from Afghanistan, because I'd have thought we'll leave all the men and we'll take the women because they're the ones who are actually in need. But this is it, these stats. This is the problem we've learned with the legal migration, because people didn't really pay much attention to it was men in the back of lorries, wasn't it? And then it was people coming through the Channel Tunnel. Then it was the small boats, and that's been a lot of focus. And then we have all those stats about the Boris wave of legal migrants, not from the EU after Brexit. We could have given them visas, but we chose not to. Apparently, we chose to just basically welcome in, let's face it, most of the third world to our country, and largest number of those people not actually on work visas. They were dependents. They were not going to be net contributors. And even those who have come, the vast majority of those who've come on legal visas are not net contributors, even if they're working, aren't they?
No, and on the visas that people are coming over, we're still seeing, about 400,000 student visas have been allocated. The dependence of students have gone down dramatically. That was started under Rishi Sunak, so can't really thank the current government for that. But it's still about double, and then China's driving that. So we didn't, 10 or 20 years ago, we didn't see many Chinese students. That's driving it. The one thing the government will champion, Julia, is the fact that the number of decisions that were made on asylum has gone up. So they are starting to try and clear this backlog. So that's a positive.
Yeah. But it was down to about 1 a week per Home Office official, wasn't it, at one point?
Oh, it was ridiculous in terms of the number. And then you look at, okay, so how many claims do actually get granted? So of say 100,000 claims that we've had, about 42% initially get granted asylum. So 58% get rejected. But then what you then need to look at is the longer term, we normally see then around 17 to 20% actually go to appeals and get granted asylum afterwards. So it's a significant number. But I think the main thing to talk about as well, Julia, is that, you know, in the year 2025, we've got, on the latest score as well, we've got 107,000 still on asylum support. So you've called out a slight reduction in the number of people in hotels, but that just means that they've been put into dispersal accommodation, or HMOs.
They're still here. They're still here, and we're still paying for them because, you know, they're on housing benefit at the very least. It's extraordinary, isn't it? And again, a lot of these people, they get granted the right to stay. Often it's just leave to remain, isn't it? So it's not that they're proven that they are in need of asylum. It's just that we're never going to be able to deport you, so we may as well just let you stay here. Not sure that's going to fly with the British public much longer. Meanwhile, of course, let's talk about the NHS stats. Now we've depressed ourselves enough. Lord Bethell, former Conservative Health Minister, saying, look, you know, we've basically doubled. In 17 years, we have doubled what is spent on the NHS from roughly 100 billion a year to 200 billion a year. Look, you were instrumental in fighting a lot of the lockdown madness with the stats, with your expertise, having been an ONS official over these years. We're spending a lot more money, but we don't live any longer. We've still got many issues, other than the fact that we are an ageing population and we're a bigger population, which would explain a lot of that extra spending. What's going wrong?
Yeah, I think the NHS is basically just in firefighting mode, and it continually be in firefighting mode. So you will see an increase in spending. Obviously, people's wages go up. You're right to call the ticking time bomb of an ageing population. And we've discussed last year, Julia, I think there's not enough discussed about what's actually going to happen in the next 15 years, because we're going to see a 37% increase in the number of people over 75 in this country. Yeah. The spades need going in the ground now to fix that and get to help.
And that's when the health needs just go sky high, isn't it?
Yeah, the NHS struggles now. It's going to be even worse when we get to the age where we need to use the NHS. So that's and basically there needs to be a greater focus, Julia, on getting those efficiencies. I've got a family member who's in hospital, and whenever I go there, a doctor will come along or a consultant will read the notes, spend time reading the notes, and then they might see somebody else. Why everything is written down, I don't know, in some parts of the NHS. You would think digitalise it all, use AI so we can do a quick kind of overview of what this patient's needs
Continuity of care.
Yeah, continuity of care. Speed things up in the NHS, and then we can get more people seen with the current resources. It's not always a case of chuck more money in. It's looking at the work practices, getting more efficient, because we're not going to have the money to fund for this extra 37% increase.
Well, especially not with the demographics we've got now. People are living longer, but younger people are not having babies. We're not going to have a population in the working age to actually support these people. Again, I think people coming up younger than me, they're going to be lucky to even get a pension, let alone any health care at this rate. How significant is this vote? Because we've had lots of by-elections over the years, over the decades, and either new parties or sort of fringe parties doing really well in a midterm by-election, and everyone goes, "Oh, this is the future. Politics has changed forever." Has it?
I mean, I think you've hinted at the real slightly boring answer, which is that we won't know until we see how everything pans out, right? You think about some of those SDP / by-election wins in the 1980s. That was it. The mould was broken, and then all of a sudden it wasn't after all. I do think that this time it might be different because we've never before had both of the major parties seem to be in quite so deep a crisis at the same time, and both of them losing votes to left and right to two radical new parties. Normally it's been sort of one or the other.
Yeah.
And so it shows, I think, a few things. One, that for the Tories, the really bad thing about this, obviously losing your deposit is always embarrassing, but it's the fact that the Reform have now clearly established that they are perfectly capable of consolidating the right-wing vote where they are the leading party. And that means that the Tories, who for a very long time have been able to say, look, we're the right-wing party that can maybe...
At the end of the day, we're the one you're going to have to vote for if you don't want the others, yeah.
I think they're losing that, and that means that in any seat where the Tories have already been pushed behind Reform, they now face the prospect of having their vote squeezed. But it also shows that the one good thing that's happened for the Tories since 2024 was the election of Zach Polanski, right? But seriously, because the Greens historically have done a bit of a Lib Dem thing, right, where they're two completely different parties in different bits of the country. In urban areas, they're this radical left-wing group, and in sort of rural areas, they're the Tories who like trees a bit more. right?
Yeah.
And so there were several seats.
But they're nice and cuddly.
Absolutely. And there were several seats where the Greens could potentially have picked off Tory seats for the next election. I think now that prospect has faded, and instead the Greens are turning into a much more potent threat to Labour.
Yeah.
And Labour have just been pushed into third place in their 50th safest seat.
I mean, that's the thing. This wasn't a seat that was really in the realms of the Greens realistically getting, or certainly Reform. I think it was the Reform parties, in terms of their target seats, 440th out of 650. So realistically, it was a big hope they would get it. But what's really interesting about this, I mean, we'll get to sort of what, the Green Party in Hannah Spencer and the winning candidate in just a moment. But in terms of for Keir Starmer, look, there's a lot of question marks being made, given now. Carl Turner, Labour MP, who's very, he's been on the show a lot, he's been on lots of media this morning, he's talking about this as a catastrophic result. But at the end of the day, there's this view that if Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester Mayor, hadn't been stopped from running for the seats, he wants to return to Parliament to basically challenge Keir Starmer for the leadership. He would have won, if he'd been the candidate and he hadn't been blocked by Keir Starmer very specifically, he would have won this seat. Now, I think that's a big question mark. He's a popular figure, he's a well-known figure in Manchester, and of course Gordon and Denton is in Manchester, Greater Manchester. I think, given the scale of anger against Keir Starmer at the moment, I would question that, but the decision was taken. Even if he won that by-election, we're going to then face an election for the Greater Manchester Mayor without the popular figure of Andy Burnham. But also the fact that they went completely for this sort of binary election campaign, which is it's us or Reform, and if you want to stop Reform, you've got to vote for us. They barely mentioned the Greens. Meanwhile, there are the Greens coming up on the left, absolutely knocking them out of the park. Almost 15,000 votes. And whereas the Reform Party got 10,500 votes.
I mean, essentially, Gordon and Denton is a very strange seat in that half of it is essentially a Labour Reform battleground and half of it is a Labour Green battleground.
Yeah.
And maybe, actually, if Labour had been a bit more shameless and they'd gone around the Reform bit being like, look, it's us or the Greens, right? It's us or those lunatics.
They did on two separate campaigns.
Right, but they actually can't... and I think this is a big problem for Labour, is that despite the threat that Reform still does pose to them, and I think there are some people saying, actually, the real problems the Greens know, both of them are serious threats, they just can't bring themselves to campaign at Reform voters. But I think on the Burnham thing, one, you're completely right about the fact that if he had stood, I think he probably would have won, not for certain, but
no.
They'd have had that mayoral vacancy. But two, what would that have changed? We'd have had a government which only won a by-election by essentially running a candidate who was an anti-prime ministerial candidate in the seat.
Point.
And also, Andy Burnham doesn't have any answers, right? I think this is the important thing to remember. Andy Burnham, it's easy to be popular when you're a devolved politician who does not have responsibility for pensions, the NHS, social care, immigration.
Spend more on this or that, Prime Minister. Yeah.
The public, if Andy Burnham becomes Prime Minister, the public will go off him just as quickly as they've gone off Sir Keir Starmer.
Well, he did. The other interesting thing is this move from everybody, it's unions or backbench MPs, saying the answer is you've got to go to the left. Labour have been, they say, lurching to the right. I have yet to see any evidence of this, but lurching to the right to take on Reform. They say, no, the answer is actually going to the left. But this is the thing. The Tories face this challenge from the right, from Reform. Labour are facing a challenge from Reform on the right and from the Greens on the left. They are being squeezed absolutely down the middle.
Absolutely. This is the thing. Whenever someone says, actually, you see this a lot since last night's results, like they've been focusing on Reform and actually they should be focusing on the Greens. It's like, no. The Greens are a serious problem, but Reform is still a serious problem. But the other thing is, people forget about the Tories, understandably.
Well, they did. They did at this election. They lost their deposits.
This is, I went to University of Manchester. Manchester Gorton has never been a seat where the Tories really feature. But if you think about it, there's a lot of voters, centrist voters, who voted Tory in 2019 and switched to Labour in 2024. The more Labour pivots left to focus on the Green Party, not only does it risk alienating voters to Reform, but it also risks alienating voters in those sort of shirey seats that it won last time.
Absolutely. Just some breaking news in relation to Manchester, and it was something that was brought up by, even in the speech actually, that Hannah Spencer gave the winning Green candidate in the by-election. Darren Connor, who's 55 years old, has been charged with possession of an offensive weapon and possession of Class B drugs. This is after reports of a man armed with an axe entered Manchester Central Mosque during Ramadan prayers. That's according to Greater Manchester Police. Big concern about that. Thankfully, no one hurt. Let's have a watch and a listen of Hannah Spencer. She's, working class, plumber, local girl, absolutely lovely. For some reason, has a haircut of a 5-year-old girl. I'm sorry, I know. I mean, all people in the world to talk about their hair. Me, I mean, come on.
I can't.
But you can. Yeah. But I mean, I'm sure if you did have more hair, you'd style it better than her and me. But I do just it's like I just don't understand. You're a grown lady in your 30s. Why you got a hairdo like you're 5? But anyway, she gave a victory speech, and this is what Hannah Spencer had to say.
Working hard. What does that get you? Because talk to anyone here and they will tell you. The people who work hard but can't put food on the table, can't get their kids' school uniforms, can't put their heating on, can't live off the pension they worked hard to save for, can't even begin to dream about ever having a holiday, ever. Because life has changed. Instead of working for a nice life, we're working to line the pockets of billionaires.
I mean, it just ticked every box there, didn't it, Henry? Working to line the pockets of billionaires. And this is interesting. She was, local girl, made good. A lot of talk about actually, she's a plumber. But, is she a bit of a hypocrite? She drives a petrol car. She goes away on, foreign holidays when green policies are opposed to both those things. They're also opposed to private landlords and second homeowners. And she's a second homeowner. Her mum helped her buy her first home. You kind of got to wonder about how consistent these people are. But I mean, when she says, what does working hard get you? The reality is, of course, the green policies. And if you haven't had have a look at my Twitter feed. We've got a column in The Sun today. I think it's a good thing that this election victory has come to the Greens. I genuinely think it's a good thing. The reason why I think it is, rather than any other party winning, is it's a wake-up call to everyone about who the Greens are, because this, to me, is exactly the same as the BNP doing well in European elections with Nick Griffin becoming an MEP back in 2009. And there was an absolute outcry when they decided to invite him on Question Time, the BBC, and everyone go, this is awful, it'll just boost support for him. No, it didn't. When people actually saw him, they heard his views, they actually looked at BNP policies. OK, they did better in the 2010 general election than they'd done in the 2005 general election, but it was still about 1 or 2%, and then they didn't win any seats and they completely collapsed. What we need for the Green Party is to stop treating them like they're some nice little tree huggers in the corner. They are a dangerous bunch. I call them communists on ketamine. That is what they are. They are a dangerous bunch of extremists. We have this talk about all our extremist policies in this parties in this country. The Greens are an extremist party. Their immigration policy, no borders, no deportations. Anyone who wants to come here can come here and get a free home and be given universal basic income. Wealth taxes, well, the money's gone within 5 minutes, folks. Net zero, not by 2050, unachievable, unaffordable, undesirable, by 2040. That will only be done by you ain't allowed to fly, you ain't allowed to drive a car, you ain't allowed to eat meat, you can't heat your home with central heating you've got right now. Legalising all drugs, including heroin. I mean, this is properly insane stuff. Legalising prostitution. Basically completely anti-Israel policies, Gaza and Palestine, completely and utterly aligning themselves with the most bitter, dangerous sectarian politics in this country, which is, I would say, the pro-Palestinian, supposedly, it's actually just anti-Israel, anti-Jew movement in this country. What do you make of the claims that Nigel Farage said that this result was a victory for sectarian voting and cheating? After we had the claims from and it was an independent body. They were allowed to stand in polling stations because, they are literally allowed to do that because they are an independent body. And they, watching what was going on, they said, and this is Democracy Volunteers, that they've seen the highest levels of family voting at an election in our 10-year history of observing elections in the UK. So they're there watching, and they're seeing basically more than one family member going into a voting booth, pulling the curtain, and the vote is happening. Now, that is a criminal offence in this country. We're told by the people running these election stations, polling stations, that that's not what happened. But they have 2 observers in each station, and they said it happened at the majority of stations, and basically they ain't seen nothing like it.
So obviously there's no reason prima facie to not take Democracy Volunteers seriously. They are a respected independent group. They're run by an academic, and they're allowed in by the Electoral Commission. They're not some crank group of people who just turn up at polling stations.
Yeah, you wouldn't be allowed to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think the interesting thing about this is that the family voting in polling stations is simply a small part of the problem that for a very long time has been postal votes.
Yes.
Right? because postal voting was originally a very, very rare thing, and it was for invalids and people who literally couldn't leave the house, servicemen,
people who are travelling,
servicemen overseas and so on. And now it's just become it's more convenient, right? But there's no secret ballot in the home, right? And so I think that actually what surprises me about this, and to be fair, I've not read in full Democracy Volunteers report. I don't want to make too definitive a claim about it, but what surprises me about this is just that these people are bothering to go and do it at the polling station.
Yeah.
Actually, because it's so easy now, in the way that we conduct our democracy, to do this kind of thing at home. I do think it's concerning that Manchester Council's staff are flatly contradicting democracy.
And Nigel Farage is saying this was happening in Muslim areas. Now, Gorton is where there's a large Muslim population and student population, in Denton. These two seats have almost nothing in common, and Denton is more of a sort of older, white working class population, and that's where it's happening. But the reality is, I've been covering elections for a very, very long time. In every single, whether it's a by-election, a council election, a general election, where we have seen seriously, worth taking serious allegations of either postal vote anomalies or this sort of, coercing, should we say, organising of how people in your family vote, people, the dead voting, whatever. Invariably, it's in Labour seats, and it's in seats which have a very high population who their heritage is from the Indian subcontinent. So it's not just, people say it's Muslims, it's not Muslims, it's Pakistanis, it's Indians, it's Bangladeshis. Now, why is that an issue? It's because these are three countries that ostensibly have democracy, but massively corrupt democracies, where corruption is absolutely the norm, where sectarian voting is absolutely the norm, where the head of the family directing how you vote, absolutely the norm. And that has simply been imported to our country. Now, people can say, oh, that's racist. No, if it was a load of Australians doing it, I'd call it out just the same. The problem exists in particular areas for a particular reason, and it is entirely related to importing corrupt practices from other countries. And if we're not going to recognise that, you're not going to call it out, we're not going to be able to deal with it.